Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, debt slaves, serfs, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks, middle class. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And I think it's becoming clear to everyone, certainly with the cost of living and inflation and astronomical prices for real estate and the like, that the American dream is really dead. And I've seen some figures recently that are pretty interesting that really spell it out pretty obviously. One is an article I read that we're now in a state where Americans that make over $100,000 a year or over are now in the class of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck. And a lot of them are struggling, and well, they should. As we know, property values are skyrocketing, insurance is skyrocketing, owning a car is skyrocketing, getting car repairs is skyrocketing, the cost of food is skyrocketing, the cost of appliances is skyrocketing. Everything is just going through the ceiling, and wages are relatively stagnating. And I found it kind of interesting that when reading this article, a lot of these people that make $100,000 a year say that if they would need to make double the salary they do now in order to survive. And they're under a lot of stress. A lot of these people that even make that kind of money are getting by on using credit cards for things like groceries even. But of course, with the exorbitant interest rates on credit cards, that's a debt cycle they can ill afford. But I have to laugh at that because I remember back in the 70s when I made 3.5 bucks an hour, I always told myself, boy, if I could make $7 an hour, I'd be on easy street. By the time I made $7 an hour, it was not enough. And I thought, man, if I could make $14 an hour, I'd be on easy street. And then by the time I made $14 an hour, I said, man, if I made $28 an hour, I'd be on easy street. And now, even $28 an hour, which a lot of places in Seattle are even paying now, even for cooks and chefs, that's not enough to live on this economy. But more importantly, I saw an article about what it actually costs to live the American dream, and interesting chart. I posted it below, like, as I always do now. But it would cost over a lifetime $5,043,000 to afford what used to be called the American dream, something that used to be available to middle class Americans. Certainly in the post World War II period in the 50s, there was a huge boom, and we created this massive middle class, and life was good. And I remember my dad was in the military. My mom didn't work. We had two kids, and he could actually buy a house and feed his family and have a certain amount of mobility. And those days are gone. And so over $5 million over a lifetime to lead what is considered a normal middle class life. That includes over a lifetime $414,000 for health care, $180,000 for vacations, $40,000 just for pets, 300 or $38,000 for weddings. You need $1,636,881 to retire. Seems like a pretty specific number, but the fact that you need $1.5 million now to retire comfortably is just shocking. $957,000 for all the costs of owning a home, which includes, of course, repairs and upgrades, property taxes, um, and the like. Costs over a lifetime $900,000, over $900,000 to own a car, and of course that's reflected in insurance rates. I guess the average car payment in the United States now is $1,000 or more, which to me is crazy. I remember, being able to buy a car, and your insurance would be $400 or $500 a year at the most. Of course, one of the big costs is $876,000 for raising kids. I would argue that it's even more than that. And so and we have one of the more startling figures is 69%. So let's say 70% of Americans now live paycheck to paycheck. So that obviously includes a lot of people that make well over $100,000 a year, and it is quite a statement. If you have 70% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, It's a staggering number, but then when you look at all the expenses I just talked about, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, and we have the kind of inflation we've seen, and we have all these rising costs, we're going to have a lot more people slipping into poverty, and they certainly aren't living the American dream. And another component of this is I saw a chart. I'll see if I can dig it up and post it as well. That the level of property owned by the general public has dwindled. In 1978, it was 15%. In 2018, it's only 10%. And in 2025, it's slipping below 6%. So all the other property is owned by the mega rich. And so even that reflects the fact that even with home ownership, the slice of the pie of what the general public owns anymore is diminishing. And that just reinforces the idea of massive amounts of wealth have been transferred to the top, which continues. And it's certainly continuing under Trump, aside from his claims of trying to regain some affordability in the United States. I don't see how realistically affordability is going to come back to the United States. Even if prices go down on houses, it's still not going to be enough. And prices will go down at some point. Even if there's a crash, housing prices will go down some. But housing, for the most part, is certainly going to continue to be out of reach for most Americans. When you have a house that sold for 100,000 in 1980 that sells for 2, 3, 4 million now, how do you go back to affordability, especially when wages stagnate? And incidentally, in Europe, it's even worse. In Europe, there used to be 30% of private property owned by the general public, and now it's practically zero, which is very indicative of the state of affairs in Europe. In China, it went from 70% to 30%, which is interesting. That the most equitable distribution of publicly owned property happens to be in a communist country. So anyway, I'm sure most people are aware of it because they're living in the real economy in the United States. But the American dream is over. The American dream is dead. The American dream is a nightmare. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?